The return of Russia collusion madness is upon us, my friends. Also, we could have a verdict any hour now in the Weinstein trial. We'll talk about that. The Progressive Prosecutor Project, something I want to do a deep dive with you on. And also, bullying. Is it something that we can stop by raising awareness through videos of kids who are being bullied? That and more coming up.
It got very big ratings. And you know what? Mini Mike didn't do well last night. I was going to send him a note saying, it's not easy doing what I do, is it? Not easy. It's not easy, Mike. Not easy for any of them. No, Mike didn't do too well. He went way down. It's all right. Mini Mike. How about Klobuchar? Did you see her? She choked. She choked. She couldn't breathe. Alfred E. Newman looked at her and said something slightly derogatory. And she said, are you accusing me of being dumb? Who would make a statement like that? Because that's really what he was doing, but he doesn't want to say that. No, how about that? Are you saying I'm dumb? That was the end of her campaign in my book, you know.
Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everybody. Happy Friday. Much to get to. Oh, my, President Trump's overview of the Democratic debate. Mini Mike not getting a lot of love from the president, that's for sure. Two guys who know each other reasonably well, from what I understand from the past. And the president is reminding everybody that these Democrats, when one Democrat has to stand up and face off against Donald Trump, just think about what you saw on that stage and what we see from Trump night after night. Do we really think any of these Democrat candidates have a serious shot of sounding serious against Donald Trump? Sounding like they should unseat this president, remove him from office at a time of perhaps unprecedented American prosperity. Certainly capable of making that argument right now, given all the numbers that we've seen. And there is a clear desperation. I've been saying this to you for a while, a desperation among Democrats. What are they going to do now that they don't have that Obama-like figure who is inspirational to Democrats, or that Clinton-like figure who's just the absolute machine of the Democratic Party? They don't have either of those kinds of candidates right now. They have a lot of also-rans. They have a lot of, oh yeah, in a few years we'll say that person. Amy Klobuchar, yeah, she ran for president a few years ago, didn't she? Was that her? And Elizabeth Warren's going all out in the last touchdown of the game to try and score one for the home team. Team Warren. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. She's desperately trying to position herself as the anti-Bloomberg candidate, and she scored some points against Bloomberg, but as I've been saying to you, Bloomberg's whole game plan, and he's paying for the smartest people to be crunching the numbers for him and looking at this. He certainly has the bank book to do it, right? Bloomberg is banking it all on Super Tuesday. He's not even on the ballot in Nevada. And we'll see. We'll see how Mayor Mike does in big states like California. We'll see what kind of delegate count he racks up. I'm sorry. I understand that Republicans now are having some fun at Bloomberg's expense. Understandably so. He was up there like, can I just pay someone else to just be here instead of me? Don't I have a polo match to go to? What am I doing here? You know, he did not look like somebody who had the fire in the belly for the debate, but he's got the bank book for the presidency. That much is for sure. And so the Democrats now see this field, and the smarter ones recognize that the options are a cobbled together Democrat candidate, you know, sort of like El Cid at the end of the movie where El Cid has died, and they just put El Cid on the horse and have him do the final charge against the Spanish Muslim forces, the Moors in southern Spain, right? That they rush El Cid out on the horse at the end of the movie. That's kind of what they're going to try to do here with whatever Democrat campaign is left standing at the end of this, unless it's Bernie Sanders. And then they have to accept that they've gone with a radical. I mean, Bernie Sanders is a radical. I don't know why anybody would even pretend that that's not obvious. He's a radical. For American politics, he's far outside of the mainstream. All these polls you've seen about how people like Medicare for all, that's because people are lied to constantly about what Medicare for all would mean. It's also a reminder, we see this, and I'll get into this later in the show, about criminal justice, and we see this now with the economy. When things are good, people often forget why things were not so good before. When you've lost a connection to what bad governance really feels like to you day to day, it's a lot easier to say, yeah, maybe we don't want to put anybody in prison. Maybe we just want to empty out the prisons except for the very, very, very worst people. Or, maybe a little more socialism isn't going to slow things down and make us poor. Redistributing some wealth might make me feel good. Well, if you grew up in a major U.S. city, as I did in the 1990s, you don't want to go back to what crime was like then and that constant sense of fear, that foreboding that was really omnipresent in a lot of American cities during my youth. I mean, and I remember what that was like. Also, those of us that remember the early years, particularly of the Obama administration after the Great Recession, when we were being told, yeah, America's best days financially are behind it. You're not going to make that much money. This is just deal with it. The government's going to have to do more for you. We are now 10 years beyond that, and we're being told, yeah, we're going to raise taxes on everybody and put the government in charge of a lot of stuff. It is because we forget what we have learned in the past that people like Bernie Sanders could even be on that debate stage. Never mind the Democratic frontrunner. But the savvier Democrat elites recognize that a Sanders candidacy would be most likely a Democrat Party driving off the cliff. It would be a very, very bad thing. And with that, we see something that I've been telling you now for weeks, and I almost had producer Mark, although I didn't want to give him extra work late at night when these stories first broke. Those of you who listen to me every day know that I've been saying, just wait, they need another Trump removal narrative. They're going to find another one, and they're probably going to, what have I been saying? They're going to return to Russia collusion. Even producer Mark knows this is a prediction I've gotten right. They're going to return to Russia collusion. It's just they have this emotional need. There's this space in their brain that must be filled with Russia, Russia, Russia. And that might have seemed like a somewhat extreme prediction a week or two ago when I first started. Right after impeachment, what did I say? They got to come up with another thing, and you're going to see the return of Russia collusion. They're going to bring it back. Here we are, folks. Crazy Democrats back in action with the Russia collusion narrative. New York Times has this piece out that's getting a lot of play from all the other networks that are now using it as their jump-off point for their own stories about this, that Russia is trying to help Trump. Russia is interfering on Trump's behalf in the 2020 election already. This is the story. This is what we're being told. This is also very clear signaling to all of us that they are terrified at the prospect of Trump winning. Because remember, if Russia interferes and then a Democrat wins, well, they'll be obviously very happy about the Democrat defeating Trump. But a lot of people who approach this using their faculties of reason and not allowing propagandized emotion to take over would say, hold on a second. I guess that Russia interference stuff wasn't really that powerful because the Democrat won anyway. Remember, that was the initial assessment of Obama and all of his top people in the White House. They didn't do anything about Russian interference, and they didn't care about it until after Hillary lost. Then all of a sudden it became a major issue of national security. But you're seeing the machinery of Russia-Trump hysteria kicking into gear once again. It is as predictable, at least for me, as it is crazy. CNN here with its number one story. We call it the carousel on websites where they put big photos up there for you to click on. The number one story in the carousel at CNN, why Putin would want Trump to win in 2020. Analysis they have written in a little thing down below. This is propaganda. First of all, Trump has been an aggressive opponent of Russia in areas where it makes sense to be one. The only area in which there's a real place to criticize Trump about Russia is the way that he speaks personally about Vladimir Putin, which I think he does in part because he doesn't want to antagonize a world leader that he's going to have to deal with. Russia is not Iran, it's not Venezuela. You can't just build a wall around Russia and pretend it doesn't exist. It's too big, it's too important. It's also, though, not a real threat to us, which is where the media gets completely out of whack. But if you look at Ukraine, if you look at the additional sanctions, if you look at things that the Trump administration has done against Russia, it's not possible to make the case that Trump is weaker on Russia than Obama was. Trump is clearly stronger. It is, in fact, the Trump administration that had the United States military, in an effort to protect our Kurdish allies in Syria, call in airstrikes that killed up to 200 Russian paramilitaries. That's the kind of thing that would really upset a country that you were supposed to be buddy-buddy with, right? Russia didn't challenge him on this, didn't do anything to retaliate. Trump was willing to send the Javelin anti-tank missiles to Ukrainian anti-Russian fighters, right? Ukrainian National Army fighting against Russian-backed paramilitaries. Obama was explicitly unwilling to do that because he didn't want to antagonize Russia too much. Well, gee, who's really in Russia's pocket? Remember the conversation between Obama and Medvedev? After my election, I'll have more flexibility. That's just an admission on an open mic that he didn't realize was going to pick up what he was saying, that, yeah, once I fool enough silly Americans, enough low information voters, then I'll be able to do what I want here with Russia stuff. So don't worry about it. I got you covered. That's what he was saying. Oh, but Trump is the bad guy on Russia. What does interference in the election even mean? Are we now going to pretend that in an era of billions and billions of dollars of domestic spending on media and campaigns and door knocking and the media apparatus that's already out there spewing all of its messages and all of its propaganda for one side or the other, that a couple of dudes sitting in a basement in a Russian, FSB facility somewhere are going to be able to come up with a couple of memes that just take over the internet and that cause one candidate to win and one candidate to lose the election? It's so stupid when you think about it that it's hard to imagine any adult who has ever read a newspaper and can read would think that this is a real plan. But this is now what we're being told is happening in the country, that there's already Russian interference in this election too on Trump's behalf. And can't you just see how this is hedging? This is hedging the bets emotionally for Democrats. That's what's going on here. They recognize that the candidates that they've put forward, unlikely, I'm not saying they can't, because it's going to be a very narrow race. Remember, this is fighting over 2 yards of a football field, really, between Democrats and Republicans in the presidential election. Don't forget that. This is very much on the margins. There are a lot of states that we already know how they're going to vote. We already know what's going to happen. It's only in a handful of states that the contest will really be fought. And to think that the Russians, through their version of political micro-targeting, would be able to flip one or the other just with internet memes? I mean, if this is the case, the biggest news organizations in the world should pay whatever they have to hire these Russian troll farms or these Russian meme makers, because they're better at American political propaganda than the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in this country who are constantly doing the same thing. But one of the great tricks that the media has pulled off, and by great I mean powerful, but certainly not good, is removing any sense of proportionality and any sense of judgment in what they will report. As I've said to you before, Russian interference in the election, when you look at what was really done, the amount of spending, the amount of memes, the amount of contact, and you then put that against, this is for the 2016 election, you put that against all of the ongoing political debate and effort and media time, everything that's going into the election here at home. This would be like saying that by pouring a cup of water into the ocean, let's say by pouring a cup of lemonade into the ocean, you have changed the composition of the ocean, and then reporting that everywhere. That is a technically true statement. By pouring a cup of lemonade into the ocean, you have changed what was in that ocean before. But would any normal human being say, whoa, we got a lemonade ocean now? That's what the Democrats have done with Russia-Trump interference. Pretended that something that is quite honestly irrelevant to the voting patterns of any American, that is irrelevant to the outcome of the election, is somehow this powerful, this unstoppable, unbelievably effective political interference. No one really thinks that's the case. But if you're desperate enough because you've been saying that Donald Trump would be a terrible president, and he's actually been a really good president, if you're desperate enough because you keep saying the adults are going to be in charge of this, of the government when the Democrats come into power, and then the American people see the clown show that is the Democrat field right now, yeah, I guess you'd rather believe that Russia is going to deliver the election to Trump again. They're already setting the stage for this. They're already trying to tell you that no matter what the election results are, they will claim that Trump, even in re-election, is illegitimate. And I promise you, mark me saying this right now, there will be media outlets that claim, and pundits and Democrats, that Russia gave Trump the 2020 election too. Just want to make sure, team, as you're listening to this, that you subscribe to the Buck Sexton Show wherever you listen to podcasts. This is a Friday all-hands-on-deck request. Please do subscribe if you have not already. The Buck Sexton Show, available anywhere you listen to podcasts, the Apple Podcast Store. Also, you can listen on the iHeartRadio app. We'd love to see those numbers get a big jump going into Super Tuesday and going into March. So please do subscribe to the Buck Sexton Show, and also check us out on Pluto, channel 248, The First. Download the Pluto TV app. It's totally free. It's a great way to see what's going on in the Freedom Hut.
It's hard to come up with the words for what's going on right now. The fact that all that we've been through, the hell of the last couple of years, the Russians interfering, according to 17 of our intelligence agencies in the 2016 election. And here they go again, as if they can just get away with the robbery again, daylight robbery again, with the President of the United States helping to keep it secret instead of trying to stop them. A normal president would have stopped the Russians from what they're up to again in this election.
Stop the Russians. Thanks, Chris Matthews. How? How exactly is Donald Trump supposed to stop the Russians? Make an angry phone. There's already sanctions. There's already a very frosty relationship between the two countries diplomatically. And it seems like Democrats want to push us closer and closer to open war with Russia. Nothing is enough for them. But what is the president supposed to do? They have a special component now of the intelligence community that looks specifically at election interference. Somehow this is from the New York Times story, that person assigned that role under acting DNI McGuire, who is going to be replaced soon with Richard Grenell. And I want to get to that, by the way, about the Grenell replacement as DNI. He's been the U.S. ambassador to Germany, been doing a very good job there. But because he is viewed as somebody who is favorable to Donald Trump, it's terrible what's going on in the intelligence community. I was in the intelligence community. I still have a lot of friends who are inside. Some of them are actually quite senior now. I can give you a little more of the reality view of what it means to have Richard Grenell as the director of national intelligence, especially given what we know about some of the more recent heads of these various agencies. But on this story from the New York Times that got all of this attention about interference in the election from the Russians. I mean, this all comes from a New York Times report that says, lawmakers are warned that Russia is meddling to re-elect Trump. A classified briefing to House members is said to have angered the president, who complained that Democrats would weaponize the disclosure. You don't say. Notice how the way this is framed is that Trump's the bad guy because some people, Democrats, leaked information from a classified briefing in order to damage the president And then when the president says, guys, they're leaking classified, that's a felony, by the way. Are we going to see any prosecutions about them? Yeah, right after we see a prosecution for the senior Obama appointee that I'm pretty sure was the one who leaked General Flynn's phone call to David Ignatius at the Washington Post to get him in trouble so that he would be removed as national security advisor and prosecuted and ruined. Right after we get that leaker, which we're not going to get, deep state protects its own. So this is the story that was printed in the Times. On February 13th, intelligence officials warned House lawmakers that Russia was interfering in the 2020 campaign to try to get President Trump reelected. 5 people familiar with the matter said. A disclosure to Congress that angered Trump. You know why? One of the reasons why Trump was angry? This was reportedly told to members of Congress before it was told to the president. That's a problem. The people in the intelligence community, their chain of command is to the president of the United States. Why wasn't he informed of this first? Especially if he's then going to be criticized for not taking action. They knew that Shifty Schiff or one of his little minions would run out and leak this stuff as soon as possible. They knew that. But there's another part of this that you should know. It's really just an assessment. And there's now additional reporting from some other people who have looked at this to say that this is the judgment of somebody within the intelligence community and that it is being improperly framed by the New York Times to make it seem more definitive than it is. And that in essence, what they've really seen intelligence of. And remember, intelligence, I used to do this. Unlike the other radio hosts you'll hear talking about this today, or unlike the other people you see on TV for the most part, with very few exceptions, I did this work. I did the analytic side of intelligence assessments. I worked on inter-community projects that were, all the different agencies get in. I wrote for the President's Daily Briefing. I used to do this for a living. And let me tell you that there are a lot of gray areas and a lot of judgment calls. And the intel community, when it comes to judgment calls, gets it wrong over and over without any consequence. You're actually inside the bureaucracy of the intelligence community. This is the truth. You are more likely to face sanctions, more likely to see reprisals. If you are the lone voice standing up against the consensus opinion, even if and when you are proven right, you are more likely to get in trouble for that than being somebody who, rams through some consensus, quote, consensus opinion that's dead wrong. If you stand in the way of the bureaucratic consensus, you will get crushed, even if you are right. That's the way these institutions work. If you rush that through and turns out, whoopsie, invaded the wrong country, bombed the wrong building, whatever it may be, as long as you made your colleagues in the intel community feel heard and feel good in that process, you'll never get in any trouble. The bureaucracy is the ultimate self-licking ice cream cone. If you're taking care of the bureaucracy, it'll take care of you. It's the way it works. So that there was an assessment from somebody in the intel community saying that they believe that Donald Trump is a favorite of the Russians to win re-election because he's a deal maker and they might be able to create some kind of transactional relationship with him versus not knowing what they're dealing with the Democrats. Is that nefarious? Think about that for a moment. The Russians, and I don't know what sources and methods they're basing this on, of course, and this is all effectively hearsay. I mean, this is all somebody who says they heard from somebody who was in this meeting and they're giving their version of what someone else's analysis is. I mean, this is like a big game of telephone, but it's the biggest news story in the country right now. Because that's how propaganda works. You got to start with a grain of truth and you magnify it into something else. So now when you look at this, isn't it much more understandable that if you're doing an analytic assessment from inside the intelligence community about Russian intention in the U.S. 2020 election, wouldn't it be normal for the Russian, wouldn't it, when I say normal, wouldn't it be your expectation that the Russians would say, without even knowing who the Democrat candidate is going to be, well, at least with Trump, we know we can talk to him and he'll engage with us. Who knows what that lunatic Joe Biden will do? Well, they probably have a pretty good sense of Biden from the past, but who knows what that lunatic Elizabeth Warren will do, or They don't know anything about Amy Klobuchar, right? The idea being they just don't really know, with the exception of, I mean, Bernie probably still has a dacha somewhere in the Soviet Union / Russia. I mean, Russia now, but you know what I'm saying. He visited the Soviet Union back in the day. Dacha, by the way, is a summer house. David Harsanyi had a great joke about that. He's like, his cabin in Vermont, doesn't he call it a dacha? That's the Russian nobility and the Russian elite. That's what they call their summer homes. It's just a little cabin. Costs about $600,000. How many of you have a little cabin that's your third domicile that costs $600,000? I'm just wondering. I'm guessing not that many, because that would put you in the 1%, and this show is heard by hundreds of thousands of people across the country. So, yeah, some of you, I'm sure, some of you are like, Buck, I've got a $3 million, summer home or something. But for the most part, I don't think people running around like my third home is worth $600,000, and that's not any indication of wealth. That's an indication of wealth. But the Russians it seems like this analysis is just that the Russians are uncertain of who the Democrat is and how much they'll be able to work with whoever that person is. And Donald Trump is someone that is now a known commodity. That's really it. That seems to be a more clear interpretation of what's going on. Oh, and the Russians are going to play some games again and meddle in the elections and have some level of plausible deniability because it worked incredibly well for them the last time. Because of the Democrats' fixation on this issue, because of their obsession with Russia-Trump collusion, the Russians look at this like, wow, we were able to turn America inward on itself, to turn American factionalism into, to turn it up to overdrive so that the Americans are all at each other's throats, which gives Russia a freer hand on its policy objectives. I mean, the Russians, through very, very little spending and little action and no risk to any of their personnel, were able to create a narrative in this country where the loudest voices, the most prominent, powerful, wealthy Democrats in America have been running around calling the president a traitor for years and saying that he sold out our country, he didn't really win the election, and he's doing Putin's bidding. I mean, this is a propaganda coup. This is a disinformation operation for the Russians in this last election that blows away what the KGB was able to do in the past in this regard. And this was stunning. So, yeah, of course the Russians are probably going to play games again. What are we going to do? Ratchet up sanctions? Sure. We're not going to go to war with Russia over Facebook posts. I know the Democrats seem to think that's we got to be able to threaten anything. Oh, the sanctity of our elections. This is absurd. And any normal person could see this and say, so what? I mean, Russia's creating sock puppets. The internet's the Wild West. Twitter, Facebook, people post crazy stuff all the time. Lots of people are lying. Political campaigns are lying. Politicians are lying. Russians are lying. And they're just trying to, sow a little more discord. And the Democrat response to that is to take that intent of sowing discord and just explode it. I mean, just go with it as much as anybody could ever imagine. You want to talk about doing Russia's bidding? The Democrats do Russia's bidding every time they parrot this propaganda about how Trump is a Putin stooge and that Russia stole the last election and Russian interference should keep us all on the edge of our seats. They always say that Trump is playing into Putin's hands. The great irony here is the Democrats playing into Putin's hands all the time, and they continue to. We've gone through the Russia-Trump collusion special counsel. They went scorched earth against everybody in Trump's orbit. And what do they find at the end? Nothing. Nothing. After all that. And now they're bringing it back. These people are nuts. I say it, I mean it. I mean, there's an absurdity now at the heart of the Democrat national narrative, their identity, their sense of who their party is. They've completely lost it.
And I'm hoping that the intelligence professionals are going to continue to do their best to provide the intelligence and the analysis that the executive branch as well as the legislative branch needs. They need to try to do it despite the headwinds that they're feeling coming from the White House. Now, a lot of these individuals, I'm sure, are being intimidated and now are going to be pulling some punches because they don't want to be shown the door. It's one thing for the senior professionals to be axed, but is the White House going to start going down further now and trying to remove intelligence professionals who are just trying to do their job, but are going to face the wrath of a very vindictive Donald Trump.
So what's your message then to your former colleagues who are still fighting the fight inside the intelligence services?
Carry out those responsibilities that you swore an oath to do. Because they have that very solemn responsibility, whether you're intelligence or a diplomat or in law enforcement. You need to carry out your responsibilities with the greatest integrity and honesty and let the chips fall where they may. I would tell them not to go to the door, not to leave, continue to do their work the best they can.
That's former Obama CIA director appointee John Brennan, who is a sanctimonious moron. He also tweeted out today, "We are now in a full-blown national security crisis. By trying to prevent the flow of intelligence to Congress, Trump is abetting a Russian covert operation to keep him in office for Moscow's interests, not America's." That's what the guy who just gave that whole speech about, oh, just do your jobs and your oath and give the best analysis and stay where you are. That's a clarion call to the deep state, because they all know what this guy really wants. They know what he's really about. He's saying stay where you are and do what you got to do to hurt Trump going into re-election. Because this is what he's putting out on Twitter. A full-blown national security crisis? What? I told you what the story is here. Does anyone think that any of this is a full-blown national security crisis? That's the way that a normal human being would describe this? It's just amazing that they have learned nothing. They have learned nothing. Quote, this is from the New York Times piece. They have made more creative use of Facebook and other social media. Rather than impersonating Americans as they did in 2016, Russian operatives are working to get Americans to repeat disinformation. That strategy gets around social media companies' rules that prohibit inauthentic speech. To repeat disinformation? What disinformation is going to really have this impact on the election? After the Russians are working from servers in the United States rather than abroad, knowing that American intelligence agency, and the Russians are working from servers in the United States, knowing that American intelligence agencies are prohibited from operating inside the country. Yeah, but the FBI and DHS are not. So this is like idiotic. Russian hackers have also infiltrated Iran's cyber warfare unit, perhaps with the intent of launching attacks that would look like they were coming from Tehran, the National Security Agency has warned. All right. We have tremendous cyber capabilities in this country, and we can figure out usually where these attacks are coming from. But keep in mind that when they talk about attacks, it's things like lock her up memes. I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. All the propaganda and all this other stuff. It's like the media is so upset because the Russians are creating their own state-driven media effort, covert media effort, sure, to influence American opinions. I mean, do we really think that there's a world in which we're walled off from foreign governments trying to influence what Americans think? Just look at some of the recent stories about the billions of dollars flowing from countries like China and Saudi Arabia, China, to American universities and colleges. Anybody think that might have some influence on what kind of teaching is being done in the Asian Studies Department, or what kind of teaching is being done in the Middle East Studies Department? Oh, of course it is. What professors get tenure, what sort of forums are held, all this stuff. Yeah, you think that at Georgetown and at Harvard and some of these schools, with all the Saudi money they're taking, they're about to have a really in-depth course on the oppression and tyranny and Islamofascism of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? I don't think so. But you don't see people, oh, look at the interference in educating the youth and the propagandizing. We live in a very complicated world, my friends, with lots and lots of sources of information. That's never going to change. This is a delusion from the left. This is crazy talk. And to say there's a full-blown national security crisis, and to say that Trump is doing something bad here because he's annoyed, because he knows exactly this is all it's going to be. Any interference from any Russian is leaked from someone in the intelligence community having to do with our elections. Front page news story, biggest thing in the country. It's because the left has lost its mind.